do you believe that people truly grasp how addictive a lot of the food that we eat every single day actually is?
No, they don't grasp the fact that the food we eat can control our behavior, and and we have different motivations in the brain, and that as you get acclimated to this food that is so calorically dense and creates such a strong caloric rush, it actually alters brain structure and function and makes you more dependent or on those foods, both physically and emotionally. So I think that food is a powerfully addictive substance, and I don't even call it food. I call it food spelled backwards, which is doof. You got to be a doof to put those non-food. We're talking here about the addictive nature of numerous things we can talk about, but a lot of it is white flour and sugar and oil and fried foods. And of course, fatty animal foods, which also put a huge caloric rush in the bloodstream. What I'm saying is that if you're living in a natural world and you're eating foods that were adapted to natural species of animals, including humans, you couldn't get that many calories into the bloodstream at one time. We need processed foods in order to put so many calories in at one time. And it's completely unnatural for the brain. And it creates an effect on the opiate or dopamine centers of the brain, these centers of the brain that are involved with with addiction, even of drugs. And it can be oversimplified with saying you build up dopamine insensitivity, you're insensitive to dopamine stimulation, and you require more dependency on dopamine. But that's a vast oversimplification of all the intricate things that are going on simultaneously that creates food addiction.
I'm curious, you mentioned oils in particular. In terms of your belief in, are they all equally addictive? Is olive oil as addictive as coconut oil? Should we just avoid all of them? What's your take, Dr. Fuhrman?
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because obviously, as you cook an oil and you heat it up in proportion to the heat that's used on the oil and the amount of time it's put under heat, you form more rancid compounds, and the rancidity and the free radicals formed in the oil that's being cooked increases its risk of being genotoxic or carcinogenic, damage our genes, or being harmful. But even, let's say, extra virgin olive oil is still fattening, and fat on the body is detrimental to human health and longevity. And in proportion to the body fat percentage goes up, so increases in proportion your risk of life-threatening cancers. So there's no such thing as a healthy overweight person. That's just a myth that people want to believe in, because they don't have enough knowledge and wisdom to know robust emotional health in order to eat healthy enough to lose weight. And it's so difficult for people who are addicted to food to lose weight. So they give up, and if they're going to give up and they fail and they're giving bad information, then they have to take care of their cognitive dissonance, their discomfort, by thinking it's okay to be overweight. And there's a lot of obvious messaging out there telling people, just be comfortable with who you are. You can't lose weight anyway. And just be a healthy overweight person, and don't worry and about all the stress involved in trying to diet and eat healthfully. And then there's a message out there. And I'm saying that it's not really accurate. It's not an accurate message. Certainly we have compassion for and understanding of people who have difficulties eating healthfully. But if we want to help them and have the most amount of goodwill for them, they need a lot of information that they could have the capacity to make their selves both healthier and happier. There's a lot of wisdom teaching here that people need to have to be able to comply with a healthy diet. But getting back to your original question about oil, is that when we eat such a concentrated calorie that enters the bloodstream so rapidly, it tells your body to store fat, because the body doesn't tolerate having a huge amount of calories in the blood. It has to get the calories out of the blood. So we can't put a huge amount of fat in the blood at one time and expect your body's going to break down fat cells. It's going to store fat. So eating oil tells the body to store fat. And turning on fat storage mechanisms, it stops fat breakdown. And it's usually additional calories. In other words, We're not talking about putting oil on people who are starving and can't get enough calories to eat. We're talking about people putting an extra 500 calories of oil on top of their diet, which already has adequate calories, and that leads to them being overweight. And it could prevent weight loss for days, even if they calorically restrict. They're still not going to lose weight because the oil turned on the fat storage mechanisms. But oil also drives, because it enters the bloodstream so rapidly, and because you create such a high caloric rush, that is as a brain stimulating substance. The high caloric entry in the blood stimulates the brain and makes you over time dependent or not feeling normal unless you eat foods that have such a high caloric rush. You get acclimated to and dependent on the caloric rush. So now you need to eat after a meal. Like if I don't have something sweet, or I don't have something that's more caloric, something like French fries or a piece of cheesecake or some ice cream, I'm not satisfied. I got to have something with the calories. I got, just having a salad with an apple and a pear and some, and a handful of beans or something isn't satisfying enough. I got to have something with more calories in it that's more going to sustain me. So that people get acclimated to, and the brain gets acclimated to this caloric rush. And it's a completely unnatural thing. It never occurred in human history for the 50,000 years we've been, let's say, I don't know if it's 50,000 or 100,000, but in other words, primates and humans who are living on this planet for these thousands of years never had their hands on such foods that had such a high caloric concentration and connected to the bloodstream with such a high amount of calories. And I always make this joke. I say, half of what we eat meets our needs, and the other half meets the needs of our doctors. And even though it's a joke, and it's kind of like a little humorous, it's really scientifically accurate, because Americans are eating approximately double the amount of calories people need to maximize their health and lifespan. And the reason they can't sustain a lower calorie, or the proper amount of food, the reason they can't sustain that is because their diet isn't nutritionally adequate enough, and they're taking in foods with such a high caloric rush, and there's a lot of reasons why, we can go into that, and they're nutritionally deficient, which makes the body build up more metabolic waste products like reactive oxygen species and advanced glycation end products and lower levels of nitric oxide. There's a whole things that happen to the body that make you feel fatigued and uncomfortable unless you keep putting excess calories in the body. So you get dependent on excess calories. You don't feel well unless you consume excess calories. And so the conventional diet gets its fat from oils and animal fats predominantly. And the Nutritarian diet that I recommend, a plant-based diet that I recommend, gets its fats from nuts and seeds, not oils or animal fats. When you get your fat from nuts and seeds instead of animal fats and oils, the fat calories enter the bloodstream slowly over hours. And it never puts too much fat in the blood at one time, because it takes 3 to 4 hours to digest an ounce of nuts or something, not 3 minutes. With oil, it goes from the lips to the hips in like 3 minutes flat. It goes right to the bloodstream. There's nothing stopping it, like pouring right through the bloodstream, the wall of the digestive tract. When you eat nuts and seeds, because the calories are coming in so much more slowly, the body you're not flooding the blood with so many calories, so the body preferentially burns that fat for energy as it comes in. It doesn't have to turn on fat storage hormones and store it. And because it's not going to rev up fat storage, it's not going to shut down fat breakdown. So it's completely different biological effects. I used to say on my PBS show, I used to make the joke, I'd say to the audience, sesame oil or sesame seeds? And they'd say sesame seeds. And I'd say, walnut oil or walnuts, or, flax seeds or flaxseed oil, which is healthier, which is different, completely opposite biologic effects. And I'd hold up and I'd say motor oil, and I'd just make a joke out of it.